Hello, my name is Jonah White. I'm an apocalyptic author of the Shadows of Darkness series with Remnants of Resistance, book 2 in the series, coming out just last week. If you want to learn more about my series, visit www.jonahwauthor.com. So in this video, it's going to be a little bit of a different format. You only hear my voice. I'm going to experiment with this sort of format for a little bit and see if you guys like it. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about several different flaws that could make our dystopian slash fantasy books suck or it doesn't resonate with audiences. So without further ado, let's get on with this. So the first thing I would like to talk about is that many of us tend to, especially if it's our first time writing a fantasy or dystopian book, is that we try to jam so much information into one book. Now, I know this could be hard if you're doing a one and done book, but especially if you're writing a series, this is not necessary. But we're going to talk about also if you're writing one book, because this is also a problem, and it doesn't justify us trying to perform this common mistake. Doesn't matter if we don't have more books coming later on or not. So the thing is that I said in the last one is that we try to jam too much information. I didn't try to say that we try to jam a bigger plot or a broader plot. Now the thing is, when it comes to our fantasy or dystopian worlds, is that sometimes we tend to forget that our main goal is to establish the characters and their goals. We're not here to make the world the main character, because we're here to follow the main character as they journey through this world or this fantasy wonderland that we have created. So this also feeds into a next thing, that we should start simple when it comes to our fantasy or dystopian plots. Now I know many of you are thinking well, my world has so much to it and I have so much information to give about it. How can I start simple? Well, here are some basic things that you can do. Now, the first thing is obviously show, do not tell, because if you start telling people things, it's going to seem like you have way more exposition and you're trying to jam so much more information than you actually are sometimes. Because if we actually experience some of the information that you're trying to share with us, for example, if in an apocalyptic world, if you want to explain how the world got to where it was, what would be better if you have a whole chapter summarizing what came before, or a war that took place, that or a nuclear apocalypse that put the world into an apocalyptic state? Or would you rather have a prologue chapter where you can actually see that event unfold through a character's point of view? I would take the latter, because that's a little bit more simpler and it gets the job done way better than it does spending a whole chapter trying to summarize what exactly happened before the events of the book. And plus the thing is, when it comes to a fantasy world, the basic things that you need to lay down in your first book or the beginning of your standalone book is the world, where we are, and the rules or the magic system. That's what you need to establish. And then as you develop the character, which is the most important thing, then you can start incorporating more world building as the story goes on, and reveal certain things about the world whenever it's relevant, or if it has direct impact on the plot. You don't need to bring up something that's for example, if there's a certain small country in your fantasy world that has a certain group of aliens or people, but they don't play any sort of they don't have an impact on the plot. Is it good to reveal them or show information about them, or is it best to save that for a later time or a later book when they actually do come into the plot and they actually do serve a purpose? So the next thing I would like to talk about is many dystopian books or many fantasy books don't do the best job of handling exposition, because again, it kind of feeds into the first point, is that we tend to make our world like the main character, or we're trying to make that our selling point. So we're trying to feed so much information, trying to fill in the readers on our world and how it works. Well, the thing is, if no one's ever heard about this story before, or no one knows you as an author, no one cares about your world. I'm sorry to say that. No one cares about your world when they pick up your book. They're here to find out why they should care about it, and they're here to follow your characters as they explore the world. That's pretty much the main goal. They're not here because they were instantly hooked into your world, because we haven't given them a reason yet. So the exposition kind of comes with the whole show, don't tell, or revealing information when it's relevant. And as I said before, prologues can also be a good way to, for books. It could be a good tool to use when you're like writing an apocalyptic book, where the world is already in a terrible situation and there was events that came before. You could use that prologue to kind of show us how we got there. Now here's the next thing, and this kind of applies to dystopian books, and since I'm on the topic, is that many people, well, you have two different versions of dystopian books. The first one is where we get to see the world as it is now, and we see it transform into an apocalyptic world. Okay, that's pretty good. So we don't have, the pressure isn't on us to like establish the rules or the world around us and how the world got to where it was, because we're actually seeing it unfold as the story progresses. So that's a separate thing, and I'll talk about that in a separate video. But I'm going to talk about the books that start off in the apocalypse era, and I'll incorporate how I had to deal with this because I'm in a similar situation with my Shadows of Darkness series. So the thing is if you start in the middle of the apocalypse and events have already taken place, I would try to say to keep it simple of how the world got to this point. I would not start like, let's say for example, I write the Shadows of Darkness series. It's based on the biblical prophecies of the tribulation. Now, the book of Revelation and the book of Matthew and everything is pretty complex when it comes to the tribulation. And my book takes place right smack in the middle of the tribulation. So I kind of had to be faced with some issues when it came to like how to present this world, because how do I approach this book? Do I try to approach it like people should already know the tribulation and everything and where my book is taking place, or do I treat it like I'm talking to new readers where they've never heard of the tribulation, they don't know the rules or some of the most common beliefs on how the tribulation unfolds? So yeah, that's pretty much the dilemmas I was facing with. So I decided to go with a mixture of both, but mostly leaned on the side where my readers have never heard of the tribulation and may not understand how some of this works. And also, some Christians there's different denominations do not have the same beliefs on how the tribulation is going to unfold. So the thing is to start simple. Like I started out with James Janus and his conflict and his goals. That way I can give the readers something to get latched onto. Whether it worked or not, that's yet to be seen. Well, I'm not going to like try to praise myself or use myself as the example. I'm just using myself as an example, like mostly my process of like trying to tackle this issue, because it's a pretty hard one. So I started in the middle of the tribulation. I started out simple, like that the world is in a terrible place where 50% of its population is dead. The Federation and United World Army is controlling most of the world, and those were like the main things that were taking place in my world, or my apocalyptic world. Yes, there were things before like World War III or stuff like that, but that information only came in if it was relevant to the plot, or if it was relevant to the plot, as well as if that information was needed for a particular scene to work. But for me, I did not focus on what came beforehand, because the thing is, if you reveal too much of the build up towards where your story is taking place now, that's going to have two different effects on your audience. Well, number one, that's just way too much information for them to retain, especially if a lot of it's not relevant or it's not important or it's not, you can cut some of that out and it doesn't change your story. The second thing is that you're presenting like a more complex story that's taking place before your story is actually taking place, where people are going to be like, if you were going to reveal this much information, why didn't you just start at over in this section or at the beginning rather than at this point, if you're so worried about filling us in on what came beforehand. So you kind of see the dilemma here. It's sort of like if Star Wars A New Hope started where the prequel movie started, because it gave so much information on what came before and how the Empire took place and how it came to power and how Darth Vader became who he was and everything. But no, the movie starts pretty simple. We just know that the Empire is controlling the galaxy and there's a rebel force trying to oppose it. That's the information that we're given at the beginning, and pretty much a lot of the information that we're given throughout the movie in regards to what came before or the state of the universe. So the next thing I would like to talk about is obviously immersion. Now this kind of feeds into like we're trying to like create the first thing that we're trying to create in a dystopian or fantasy world is a compelling character where we can get immersed in the story, because remember, your character is sort of like the avatar for us to experience the story through their lens. That way we can be hooked and gripped by your world if we have a compelling character that we can get behind, and plus we understand their goals. So the next thing I want to talk about is obviously, now that you have established your world, but you need to like continue to build your world throughout the whole book, you need to hold our attention. That way we can experience your fantasy or dystopian world. So the main goal is, and now I'm going to be saying we, but when I'm saying we, I'm saying your main character or the character that we're supposed to be following. So the goal of your story from the beginning is where we are, who we are, what's the goal, and why should we care. And it's not meant to like fill us in on your world. That's not your main goal. That's a long-term goal, is to fill us in on everything that goes on in your world. So the 4 points of of your main goal is who we are, means, or I'm sorry, where we are. So what world are we taking place in? So some basic information. Who we are, who is our characters, and who's our protagonist, and what's the goal. Like what's the main plot of your story, and why should we care? Like why should we care about your character's journey, and thus that can lead towards why should we care about your world, because we're going to be experiencing it through their lens. And this kind of goes for dystopian books as well, because I had to like, if I want people that's never heard about the tribulation period to be interested in my book that takes place in this book, I need to give them a character to root for or to sympathize with. That way you can understand his struggles, his goals throughout this, and that way you can kind of learn about the world and its state through his eyes and as the story progresses. Plus, I have a series to write my the story in, so like I have time to establish my world. So one final point I want to talk about, and this is for like, sort of like a problem that I have with some, not all, but some of the Christian like apocalyptic or tribulation stories, is that a lot of the stories seem to be so focused on like trying to tell us how the end times is going to unfold or how the prophecies are going to be fulfilled, where it kind of like takes away from the character development. And it also like makes the story feel too bloated with information, and it seems like the point of the story is just to tell us how the author feels the end times is going to unfold rather than it being a compelling story. And I've read through some of these and they are not very enjoyable to get through. Now, I'm not trying to like dig at the authors because I'm pretty sure they're sincere. They're pretty good at writing, but I don't like when the stories are meant to be like a tool to like preach at the audience or get them on your side on like how you view the end times is going to be. So that's going to conclude this video here on why certain dystopian or fantasy books tend to suck right off the bat, or you just can't hook on your readers. And a lot of it just has to do with exposition or how you're building up your world. That's just the main two things that's going to really bring down your story. And also some people tend to just forget about the goals, about where we are, who we are, and what's the goal and why we should care. Like, that's the main goal of your story. It is not to sell us. Yes, you're trying to sell us your world, but that's not, shouldn't be the first thing you do, is try to fill us in on everything that's going on in your world like it's a Wikipedia page. So I'm going to end the video there. I'm going to hopefully do some live streams of my writing process as I try to write more novels throughout the rest of this year, as well as I'll probably post some reviews on like certain apocalyptic and political thrillers that I've read that inspired my Shadows of Darkness series and kind of give my thoughts. I don't know if I'm going to review other AuthorTuber or other independent authors' books to kind of like help show my support or show like spotlight to some of these other authors' books, but I'll think about it and see if it's worth my time or if that's something that you guys want. So remember, feel free to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications, because if you do this and leave comments down below, it also lets me know that you like these writing tips videos versus my own personal book videos where I just show myself writing and doing writing sprints. So without being said, I'll see you guys next time. Happy writing.